Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to do the official ability tier list today here for Halls of Torment. As you can see, I have all the abilities down here ready to go. So they're going to be four major categories that I'm going to consider while we're ranking these. So number one is the overall sort of effectiveness and power of these abilities. We're going to consider the early game and the late game. So early game effectiveness and how good are they at high torment when you have a bunch of shards to use. We are going to consider also any secondary effects that these abilities can do and how good they are. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, the fun factor. We are going to include fun factor, but power is equally important, I'd say. So guys, if you enjoy the video, smash like and subscribe. We're going to get straight into this one. We're going to start with the Arcane Rift. So the Arcane Rift is actually a personal favorite of mine. Probably not my favorite one in the game, but I really like this thing for late game. High torment level, when you have a bunch of shards to use, this thing can actually be really powerful. Unfortunately, it has a lot of downsides too. Number one, early game, it's pretty average, I would say, average to bad. If you can't pump up its area that much or its damage, it's pretty average. And it also has one other major weakness. That is the fact that without the Wandering Rifts upgrade, it's pretty bad, I would say. Not only is that, it has 5 total potential upgrades, which means if you are going to run High Torment with the randomized artifact, there's a high chance that you're not even going to get the Wandering Rifts. And without the Wandering Rifts, frankly, I think this is a pretty bad ability. In fact, so bad that I'm going to throw it here into C tier. You can put elemental effects on it as a secondary option. Now, the elemental effects, they're okay, but elemental damage in this game is just nowhere near as potent as direct damage, so I don't think that really has much going for it. The Splinters upgrade is pretty interesting, though. I do like taking Wandering Rifts and the Splinters upgrades. I think if you are running a super high torment level with a bunch of shards and area, you can, bump this up a tier, but I think overall, I think we're going to put it in the C tier category. So the Arcane Splinters is up next. I really like doing force stacking with the Arcane Splinters. You can have a lot of them out at once. This ability has some pretty interesting utility. You can put the elemental stuff on it as well, or you can just boost the damage through the other upgrades and make them split up and cover a huge area on the field. I really like the Splinters. I think they're pretty interesting late game. Early game, they're okay, I would say I can put them just above the Rifts. They do not require a specific upgrade to be good. They have the same elemental type of utility, but I think overall they're a bit stronger. And if you spec them out correctly with some extra base damage from like a ring or something, for example, and you do some force stacking shenanigans, you can make some pretty crazy builds with this thing. I think they are a little bit above the Rifts over here. Okay, number 3 is the Astronomer's Orb. So Astronomer's Orbs is an interesting one because early game, it's pretty trash. Late game, you can do some silly fun things with it, but even in the late game, it is just not that strong. Unfortunately, it doesn't scale up like some of the other abilities that we'll get to here in a minute. Now, you can apply Spark with one of the upgrades, or you can take the other 2 upgrades to get additional orbs, and the other one makes it sort of kind of spin in an eccentric manner, which is, it is interesting, it is pretty cool, but the thing with the Astronomer's Orbs is you really need multi-strike and movement speed to really make them actually go hard, and then you really need to stack on a ton of base damage to really get them going. I think these orbs have a fun factor, but overall they're pretty weak. I'm actually going to put them into C tier over here. Okay, so we have the Aura next. This is the Cleric's special ability you can unlock through the Cleric's quest. Now, this thing is pretty good for early game. It falls off pretty hard in the late game, though, due to the fact that it spreads its damage equally across all the enemies it hits. That means if you bump up its area, even if you bump up its damage quite a bit, it is going to spread that damage around, which means late game, when you have tons of enemies on the field at once, it's actually really weak. Now, it can apply Fragile, which is a pretty interesting and powerful debuff. However, it has naturally such a slow rate of fire that it's actually not the best ability for applying Fragile either. We have some better abilities in here for doing the same sort of thing. I think early game it's really strong. It has some utility in certain, areas of the game, like speedrunning the Vault, for example, but again, it's a pretty average ability. Man, we're starting with some of the, the lower abilities here. Now we've got some elemental ones coming up here. Man, oof. This tier list is going to be interesting. So we have Dragon's Breath here. I actually do think Dragon's Breath has some potential. It can be pretty strong if you're able to spam out a lot of fire on the field at once. I think Burn is potentially one of the more powerful elemental effects out there, especially considering you have an artifact that has a 20% chance for everything to just burn automatically when it gets hit. So I think you can really stack on burn damage and sort of make something with this ability. Again, I just don't think it's that strong overall. I think some of these elemental abilities really kind of struggle in the late game. They're okay early game when you can just sort of set everything on fire and watch everything go down. Obviously, the main secondary effect on this one is the burn damage, but you can also make this a physical attack, damage attack. Again, I think we're going to put this one in C. Man, we've got a lot of C stuff early on here. Maybe we should mix it up and pick up some of these more powerful abilities, because unfortunately, the Flame Strike is even worse. The way the charge time works on this thing, I think works against it. You have to wait for the charge to go all the way up before it'll do maximum damage. And even even in the early game, there are enough enemies on the screen at once that you're never really getting maximum damage out of this thing the way it sort of works. It does have one really strong utility, and that is for the speed runs in the vault. Specifically for speed running the vault, it's a very powerful ability, but it's just really not going to do that much for you in the early game, nor the late game, nor anywhere else aside from the vault. To that end, I'm actually going to put it in D. This is one of the worst abilities in the game. In fact, we have two of the worst abilities in the game in a row here. The Hailstorm. My oh my, Hailstorm is my least favorite ability in the game on a personal level. I also think it's one of the weakest. Without any of the early game, any of the ability upgrades you can get from the tomes, this thing is god awful, especially at high torment level. If you pick this one at torment 30 as your first ability, you may as well just reset the game. It really is that bad. Now, you can get some interesting stuff going on it if you spec really hard into movement speed and make these things go spinning around like crazy, but the unfortunate truth is elemental damage in this game, it really lags behind direct damage. Frost is okay, but this is really not the best way to apply Frost anyway. And I think this one down here is better. It's just better overall at applying Frost and all that sort of thing. We're going to put this one in the D tier, man. We started with some of the low tier stuff here. But here's Spirit Dude. So here's where things will start to turn around for us. Spirit Dude is awesome. Spirit Dude is life. Now, Spirit Dude has been underestimated by almost everyone in the Halls of Torment community. I think he is really powerful. Not only is he a good starter choice for early game, he can carry you early game at Torment 30. So the maximum difficulty this game has to offer, this guy is really good as a starter. Is he the highest DPS output ability in the game? No, but if you spec into some movement speed and just take his dash abilities, he can be really powerful. If you're going to go high summon count, you can also put the extra orbs on him, and you can just have tons of these orbs floating around everywhere. I think he's good at early game. He's good at mid and late game. He doesn't really have crazy secondary effects, but you can add burn and all that sort of stuff to the summons through some of the trait upgrades. I think, in fact, he's so good, I'm going to put him up here in A tier. I really think he's that good. Okay, we've got the Patches here next. Now, the Patches is really interesting. It is not a DPS ability. Instead, what it does is slow the enemies down and apply a ton of frost. Like I said before, it's even better at applying frost in my experience than the Hailstorm down here. Again, it's not individually the highest DPS option in the game, but it provides a good amount of utility, especially at high torment, but it can really help out low, early game, low torment sort of stuff. The frost, extra frost damage can be really nice. If you pair this with the Norseman especially, you can really get some frost shenanigans going. I think it's strong enough that we're going to put it up here with the splinters in B tier. Now, I think this is also one that's been a little bit underestimated by some folks in the community, but I do think it has a lot of potential to be a really powerful, not direct damage, obviously, but a really powerful utility one. And in fact, I think it's probably the best utility ability in the game here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here is the Ring Blades. Now, if you've been playing the end game of Halls of Torment at all, you know that Ring Blades is one of the most powerful abilities in the game. In fact, it's so strong. I'm going to put it straight up here in S tier. It is so powerful. It scales with base damage and force and crit so well. You stack attack speed, crit, and a ton of force with this thing, and you have so many of them out. Take a few range upgrades as you go. This thing will completely cover the field. You can do billions and billions and billions of damage with this thing. Not only that, it can apply fragile. It can just spam fragile everywhere. So much better than the aura ever could. It is clearly an S tier ability in this game. I don't think there's any sort of question about that, really. Ring Blades is good early game. It's great late game. I mean, it can really do everything. The secondary effect is fantastic, and it has the fun factor. It really does. All right, let's go on to the Sparks. So Sparks are pretty good. As far as the elemental abilities go, I do think it's better than some of the other junk down here. One of the reasons is it directly attacks your enemy. You don't have to sort of be close to your enemy. You don't have to like aim it or anything like that, in an AoE or anything. And it can apply a ton of Spark for you too. It has a lot of Spark upgrades in its trait. So it can be really powerful in that sense. I do think it's strong enough to pop up here in B tier. The secondary effect is pretty good. Again, the elemental effects are not the best in the game, but it has the direct damage, it has the tracking by itself, it has the extra elemental effects, and I think it is strong enough to put alongside the other abilities here in B tier. In fact, we got another elemental one. We got a few elemental ones in a row here. Now, I didn't choose the order specifically down here. I just loaded up all the images. So, the Meteor Strikes. This one is really interesting. I think maybe some people have been sleeping on this one a bit as well. If you take a bunch of multi-strike and attack speed and that sort of stuff, this thing can actually go kind of pretty crazy. The main secondary effect is obviously burn damage here as well. Again, I think burn is maybe a little bit better than Spark. I think Frost can be pretty good, especially on the Norseman, but burn can be pretty good too. I think this one is a cut above some of these abilities, so I am going to put it over here in B tier as well. Some of these maybe could be interchangeable depending on your personal preference. I do think maybe I've undersold the orbs a little bit. I do think they're pretty entertaining. They have the fun factor, but man, they are just not that powerful. You know what I mean? So now let's talk about my personal favorite of the elemental abilities, the Kugel. I think this thing is pretty fun. It is pretty cool. It's this slow-moving ball of lightning that, if you take the correct upgrades, it'll zap everything along its path. It can also explode, doing big spark in a big area. I think the Kugel is pretty good. I've used this at Torment 30, and we got some clears leveling this thing up at Torment 30. So I think it can be pretty good late game. Early game, it's pretty good. You do need some of the upgrades, I think, but unlike something like the Rift that has 5 total upgrades, you really can take any of the upgrades on this one, and it can be pretty good. I think it's good enough that we can put it alongside the other elemental ones in B tier over here. It's definitely not the most powerful thing in the game, but I think it definitely has enough utility. We can put it over here in B tier. Now let's talk about probably the best early game ability. I think the Needles is the best for new players early game, but not only that, it does scale up pretty well into the late game. It's not as a high DPS output as something like Ring Blades, or maybe one of these other ones are still sitting here that we'll get to in a second. Maybe it's not quite as strong as something like the Ring Blades because it doesn't scale in the same way with Force, but it does scale with damage pretty well. As long as you take some base damage stuff to increase the damage of the Needles, it scales pretty well with stuff like attack speed and multi-strike as well to get it firing really fast. And it can combo some pretty fun stuff like, Echoing Band, for example. I think it's a really fun. Not only is it powerful, I think it's fun, and it scales pretty well into the end game as well. I think this is an all-around really powerful choice. It's not quite as strong as Ring Blades, in my opinion, but I think it is a really good choice. Okay, so the Punchy Fist down here is a really interesting one. He's a summon, he's magic as well, but he you can totally cheese the game with this guy. If you want to totally do some number overflow shenanigans, you can totally break the game using that. I'm not going to include that functionality in my tier list here because that is a glitch that it's unintended, I think, from the developers. So I'm not going to include the overflow glitch as part of as part of his sort of, functionality here. I think he is pretty good, though. I'm not going to undersell the Punchy Fist. I think he is a pretty decent choice, especially if you're going to go into a summoning build. He has an ability that allows him to actually take advantage of multi-strike and attack speed. So you can really get a lot of these going at the same time. I think he's strong enough that I'm going to put him over here in B tier. As you can see, a lot of the abilities are kind of middle of the road, I would say. I think he is a pretty interesting choice. If you're going to go anything magic or summoning, he's an interesting choice you can take, but I think he really does benefit from the upgrade that allows him to take advantage of the attack speed and the multi-strike and all that sort of stuff. Getting a ton of the fists out on the field all at once is pretty fun. So he has the fun factor there too. Is he as strong as some of this other stuff that we're going to get to here? No, not quite. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time. We have come to Morningstar, which in my opinion is single-handedly the strongest ability in the game. I am going to put it, alongside Ring Blades here, because there isn't an S. If there was an S plus tier, I'd put him there. He's that good. He scales so much with Force. It's insane the amount of DPS you can achieve with this thing. It really, really is really crazy, but not only that, he scales well in the early game. Late game, he goes absolutely insane. He has the fun factor too. You can put silly things like increased area on it and go crazy with like multi-strike and attack speed and just have a ton of them twirling around. All three of his upgrades are pretty interesting. I think Spike Chain and Butterfly Swing combo is really, really powerful here. But the other one where it sends the balls flying out to is really, really powerful. I really do think this is the single highest possible DPS weapon in the game because of how it scales with Force currently. The Force multiplier on this thing is absolutely insane. You can get over 100 billion damage just with this ability alone in a run. It's that crazy. I'm not even kidding. We have a video on the channel for that if you want to check that out. All right, so we go from one of the best to probably one of the worst. Roly Poly dude here, he's okay. He has some potential, but man, I don't really think he has the fun factor that much, and I just don't think he's that powerful overall either. Is he as bad as something like these two? I don't know. Maybe we can put him in C tier. Maybe we can give him a little pat on the back and say, there, you're all right. I don't think he is as powerful as most of the other abilities that we've put in the tiers above him. So we're going to leave him over here alongside, some of the weaker ones. Again, look, any of these abilities you can, if you pump 1,000+ shards into them, you can make them, do over hundreds of million, or some of them you can probably do 1 billion+ damage if you have 1,000 or plus shards, but I don't think an ability is good if it requires that many shards to really kind of be good and go crazy, if you know what I mean. Also, his upgrades do not allow him to go above 2 roly-poly men out at the same time. Even when you stack up a whole lot of extra summons and all that sort of stuff, he's just the maximum he has is just two dudes rolling around at once, which it's okay, but it is what it is. All right, last but certainly not least is Transfixion. This is a pretty cool ability. I'd say this is a very strong ability overall. It does require you to pump in some attack speed and multi-strike type stuff to really, really take advantage of it. And I think the base damage type stuff really, really helps out too. But it has a lot of utility. Not only does it have high rate of fire, you can spam it out everywhere at the same time. It's pretty good early game. It does scale pretty well into the late game, not just for its damage. It does have the potential of applying Fragile, and Fragile is really, really powerful, especially late game. Anything that'll give you extra DPS output, late game is really good. If you're going to go into any kind of projectile type build, this thing is really, really strong too. I think it's strong enough. We're going to put it up here in A tier. It's going to be my third A tier right here. So this is where we've ended up. I think S tier is pretty obvious that these two are above everything else in the game right now. A tier, maybe this is a controversial pick. The Spirit Dude, I think he's really powerful. He has a lot of utility for early game. I think he has the fun factor, and he scales really, really well for Torment 30. So late game, he actually can be really, really, really useful. A lot of that is to do with the way that his base functionality works. Well, he'll do the dash and do an AoE when he hits the area around you. It can really clear the area out around you, which really helps for like Torment 30, for example. Needles, I think, is a great choice. It's a early game king. It scales pretty well into the late game. It's not as strong as these, but it still scales pretty well. I think it personally has the fun factor, especially if you can spam the attack speed and that sort of stuff on it. Transfixion is great. I think especially for the fragile it can put out, but also not bad damage. I think you could make a case for moving this one up to A tier 2. I really like the arcane splinters. Patches is my choice at B tier. I think you could probably put it down. It's not a high DPS ability. If you really want to spec out into DPS, this is probably not the one to take. I think these three sort of get lumped together. They're decent elemental abilities, but nothing super, super crazy. My favorite of all of them is the Kugel over here. I think if you were going to put any of them up a tier, it would personally be Kugel for me. Punchy Fist, you can break the game with the overflow shenanigans, but I don't think it's that crazy overall. Now, Arcane Rift, maybe we could jump this one up to, but I just think the fact that it relies on the Wandering Rifts to be really, really good, I think is what is put it down for me on a personal level. Now, the orbs, it has the fun factor, as I said, but for me, it is just too weak and requires too much character movement speed to really, really be good. I don't think tying the orbs movement speed to your character's movement speed was really the great way to do it on a personal level, but Aura is great early game, terrible into the late game, in my opinion. It has some utility for speedrunning, but that's a sort of about it. I think these two are just uninteresting and not that strong. And then D tier, poor Flame Strike. His only utility in the game really is the speedrun, and then Hailstorm, in my opinion, the worst ability in the game. So there we go, guys. If you disagree with me, let me know with a comment down below. I'd be super interested to know what your take is on the ability tier list here. I think maybe we could, maybe bump up the arcane splinters and the arcane rifts a little bit. But aside from that, I think we got it relatively correct here. Let me know if you disagree. What's your favorite ability in the game? Let me know with a comment down below. And if you think I'm crazy, if you think I'm totally wrong on this, give me your tier list. I'm super interested to know. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting like and subscribe. Thank you very much for tuning into this one. I hope you have a fantastic, amazing day wherever you are. Take it easy.